questions do you have for me before we move on? Was anybody having a hard time going through them? Or did we get through it with help from our study partner? Got through it? Muscled through it? All right. Okay. So what we're going to go into next is the most diverse of all the tissues that we're going to do. And quite honestly, this is going to be the one that's going to have the highest number of tissues within it. We'll get through it. And then after we're done with connective tissues, then the rest is a piece of cake. Then we only have 4 more tissue types. So the good news is, after this, we only have 4 more tissue types. The bad news is we've only learned 8 so far. So 8 plus 4 is 12, so we got 10 to learn here. We can do 10, though. You did 8, you can do 2 more, right? So before we start looking at the connective tissues, what we need to do is we need to, just like we looked at the epithelial tissues and looked at what was similar between all the epithelial tissues, we have to look at the commonalities between all of the connective tissues. Because if you understand what is the commonality between all the connective tissues, it helps you. Okay, so first of all, we have to look at what a connective tissue is made up of. And a connective tissue is made up of 2 main things. So when we look at connective tissues, 2 main things. Number 1, we have the cells of that tissue, the cells of the tissue. And then we have what's called the extracellular matrix. What is the matrix? It's not the Matrix like the movie Matrix. I can't believe how old that movie is already. I remember when the Matrix first came out, I'm like, holy cow, looking at back, was that like 20 years ago? Almost 20 years ago. Crazy. All right, so anyway, I digress. All right, so we have the matrix and we have the cells. Do you see cells in this picture? Yes, you do. Okay. I do too. Now, they're trying to show you all the different cells at the same time, but or some cells. So we've got a cell here, we've got a cell here, we've got some cells here, we've got a cell here, got a cell here. Okay, so tell me what you're seeing in this picture compared to epithelial tissue. What are you seeing as a difference? You might have multiple types of cells. Yes. What else about the cells? Go ahead. Yes, a lot of space between the cells. It looks a little different than the epithelial tissue, doesn't it? Those cells are so packed tight together, there wasn't room for anything else. But what do you see? You see space. What else do you see? Yeah, there might be blood vessels in this one. Yep. There is one in this one, yes. Not all have blood vessels, but some do, yes. What else do you see? Do you see an apical surface or a basal surface? No, you just see a whole bunch of garbage lying around, right? So we can see some differences between epithelial and connective tissues, and that's what you need to do when you start looking at these slides. You're going to say, okay, what do I see? I just see a whole bunch of cells crammed together. I see an apical surface, a basal surface. I'm probably looking at an epithelial tissue, right? Or you can say, I don't know, I see fibers, I see lots of stringy things, I see cells, but they're all spaced out. I don't see an apical surface, I don't see a basal surface, so it's not epithelial. Might be connective, but it also could be nervous or muscle. We haven't seen those yet, so we haven't had anything to compare to in that regard, but you will when we're done. Okay, so we're able to differentiate, and that's the key. You have to be able to differentiate and know what the heck you're looking at. First of all, by tissue type at least, epithelial versus connective. So can you see the difference between the epithelial and connective tissue based on the pictures that we've shown you here? I see people nodding their heads. Yes, okay, so hopefully some have, and if you haven't, that's fine. We'll keep working through it. Okay, so what do we see here? The cells. Now, there we go again, trying to write on that other screen. I need to get both of these working, and no, only one works. All right, so when you look at the cells, You might see what they call a mesenchymal cell. That's like an embryonic type of tissue cell. Okay, so you might see that. You might see a macrophage, which is like an immune type of cell, a fat cell. You might see a fibroblast, which is a cell that lays down fibers. You could see blood cells. You could see cartilage cells. You could see bone cells. It doesn't really matter, but you're going to see cells in the connective tissue, okay? So you're going to see cells. But let's talk about this matrix. What is this matrix made up of? Well, a matrix is made up of what we call ground substance and protein fibers. So let's talk about the fibers first, because that's a little bit easier. So in a connective tissue, you're going to have fibers. There are three different types of fibers that you will see in a connective tissue, or that you can see in a connective tissue. You're either going to see an elastic fiber, you're going to see a collagen fiber, or you're going to see a reticular fiber. So based on the term elastic, what do you think an elastic fiber does, or what it allows for the tissue to do? Stretch, yeah. So it gives it flexibility, stretchability. Okay, that's elastic. So here's the mind-blowing thing for all of you. I know this is really tough for you to understand, but you're smart, and I know you'll figure it out. But here, prepare for your minds to be blown, all right? So if a connective tissue has lots of elastic fibers, it's going to be stretchy. Boom. Mind blown, right? There, that's a concept. That's tough to wrap your mind around, right? Makes sense, right? So if a tissue has lots of elastic fibers, that tissue is going to be what? Stretchy. It's going to be flexible. Okay? So don't make it harder than it is. Okay, I'm going to tell you about collagen fibers. Collagen fibers are tough, durable, and resilient. So if a tissue is loaded with collagen fibers, what's that tissue going to be like? Tough, durable, and resilient. Reticular fibers. Reticular fibers are like supportive structures. And I vow every year when I get a bag of oranges in one of those red mesh bags that oranges come in sometimes, then I'm going to bring it along, and I keep forgetting. As the older I get, the less hair I have, and the worse my memory is. You know what I'm talking about, though, right? You go to a grocery store, or you go to the store, and they have oranges, and they're in this red mesh bag. You've seen that? Okay. Those mesh bags are kind of like reticular fibers. Those oranges weigh a lot, but the mesh bag is really thin. The fibers that make up that mesh bag are thin, but they can support the weight of all those oranges in them. That's like what reticular fibers are like. They're like those mesh bags that hold oranges, the reticular fibers. They're thin, but they're strong, and they support things. They hold things in place. So if you see a tissue that has lots of reticular fibers, then you're going to guess that tissue is designed to kind of hold things in place and support the structures around it. All right? So that's as hard as it is. I mean, really, you look at the fiber type, and then you decide what the characteristics of that tissue are based on the fibers. And then we have the ground substance. The ground substance is the stuff that fills in the space that isn't occupied by something else. So let's picture the ground substance is kind of like gravy that you put in the refrigerator and let sit overnight, and you pull it out. Have any of you experienced that? Seen gravy? It's like a gelatinous, but it's almost like a liquid gelatin type of thing. It's not like Jello gelatin tough, but it's kind of like a gel almost. All right, that's kind of the characteristic of ground substance. It's kind of like that. So if you picture like we're all sitting in here and someone dumps a whole bunch of gravy in here and fills up all the space that isn't us or the chairs or the tables. That's what the ground substance does. It just fills in all the gaps. All right? So here's the thing about the matrix. And I want you to write this down somewhere, or remember this if you don't have anything to write it down with. But I highly encourage you to write this down. Because if you remember this, it will help you when you're learning the connective tissues. The characteristics, this is what you write, the characteristics and qualities of a connective tissue. The characteristics and qualities of a connective tissue. I'll say it one more time. The characteristics and qualities of a connective tissue are determined by, so you should have the characteristics and qualities of a connective tissue are determined by the characteristics and qualities of the matrix. The characteristics and qualities of the matrix. The characteristics and qualities of the matrix. So the characteristics and qualities of a connective tissue are determined by the characteristics and qualities of the matrix. So if you have a liquid matrix, what is the characteristic and quality of the connective tissue? It's liquid. If you have a solid matrix, what's the characteristic and quality of the connective tissue? Solid. If you have a flexible matrix, then what's the characteristic and quality of the connective tissue? If it's flexible, what is it? Flexible. If it's somewhat durable and resilient yet supportive, sounds like underwear now, right? I think, maybe. I don't know. Sounds like an underwear commercial, maybe. Durable, resilient, supportive. All right, then that's the characteristic and quality of the tissue. Whatever the matrix is, that's going to be the connective tissue. So the quality and the characteristics, the nature of that tissue is always determined by the matrix because you're looking at the fiber types. The cells are there, but they're not going to determine the characteristics and qualities of the connective tissue. Okay. I know there's a whole bunch of stuff I have written in the notes, but I've hit on the highlights, the things that are important for you to understand. But obviously, the rest of the stuff in the notes you can check in on and look at if you need it. Let's look at the functions of connective tissue before we start going into connective tissue types. Page 6, letter B. Now, we have different types of connective tissue. Connective tissue can be liquid all the way to solid. And you're like, well, how can a tissue type be liquid or solid and everything in between? It can, because you have to look at the characteristics and qualities of the matrix, and we'll get into that. So just keep that in mind when we go through the functions, because the functions are very diverse because connective tissues are very diverse. So they can provide physical protection. They can provide support and a structural framework. They can be the building of structures. They can store. They can transport. They can protect. They could be bones. They could be ligaments. They could be adipose tissue. All different types. So there's a variety of functions that connective tissues will be. All right. So let's start to break down these connective tissues, because if we do that into the categories, it's going to make it much easier. So we're going to have the first category of connective tissue, which is going to be loose connective tissue. All right? But that's not a connective tissue type. It's a category. So we have connective tissues. One of the subcategories of connective tissues is loose connective tissue. And we have three types of loose connective tissue. And if you want to think of loose connective tissue as the pirate, maybe, oh, there you go. R, okay? R, because it's AAR, all right? So the first type of connective tissue we have is areolar connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue. Now, if you look at this picture, the top picture on this screen here, the areolar connective tissue is kind of like the jack of all trades. It kind of does a little of everything. So the picture that we saw before of the generic connective tissue, that's pretty close to areolar connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue is kind of like the generic, kind of does everything connective tissue. And you can see that the areolar connective tissue has collagen fibers. It has the elastic fibers. It's got some fibroblasts. Now, we haven't gotten that far in A&P to talk about cell types. Whenever you see the term blast as the suffix, blast, it means it's an immature cell. It's not fully developed yet. So we have like chondroblasts, that's an immature cartilage cell. We have osteoblasts, that's an immature bone cell. We have fibroblasts. These are immature fiber-producing cells. So these are the cells that are making the fibers. And then we've got ground substance. So what is this areolar connective tissue really made up of? It's made up of the ground substance, a couple cells, the fibroblasts, but it's really made up of collagen and elastic fibers. Look at the fiber types. That's going to determine the characteristics and qualities. So if we've got a little bit of collagen, collagen's tough, durable, resilient, but a little bit of elastic, what does it tell you about this tissue? Tell me about it in your own words. What do you think this tissue is going to do? Go ahead. Yes, it's tough and durable, but it's got a little give to it. Yes. So you can see here it's going to protect tissues and organs, going to bind the skin and some epithelia to deeper tissue. You're going to find it in the dermis of the skin, which you want, because you want a little bit of toughness to your skin, but you want a little bit of give. You don't want your skin to rip and tear, but you also want it to resist being, you want it to move a little bit. We see it surrounding some organs, nerve cells, some muscle cells, blood vessels. It's sort of this supportive tissue that wraps around things or cushions things to keep them from moving too much and also to keep them from getting hurt or damaged. All right? So that's areolar connective tissue. When you look at this tissue type, what are you going to see? You're going to see a lot of dark dots, like these are the fibroblasts, but you're seeing the thick collagen fibers and then the really thin elastic fibers. The next one down, adipose connective tissue. They call these, what you're seeing here are these really big white circles. Do you see that? The middle picture here. Do you see the big white circles? These are fat droplets. Isn't that appetizing? And these cells are so big and so full of fat that the cells are there, but they're way off in the corner. So the cells get pushed off into the corners of the cells. Sometimes you can't even see them. So you don't really see a lot of cellularity here. All you really see are the adipocytes. You just see the fat cells. I don't see many fibers in here. If there are, they're very far and few between. But this one's like a gimme. I mean, this is like the softball. This is like the underhand lob to you. I mean, if you see this, you would know this. Do you see an apical or basal surface here? No. You could say, well, this might be stratified squamous epithelial tissue, looking at it from top down. Maybe. But most of the time, you will not see stratified squamous epithelial tissue shown like this anyway. I would say you go with adipose tissue. All right? The function of adipose tissue is to store energy, to insulate, cushion, protect. I mean, that's what it does. So, I think back to when I was dissecting cadavers years ago, and you go into like the area of the neck into the shoulder and dissecting out what they call the brachial plexus. Bless you. Bless you again. The brachial plexus, and dissecting all those nerves are wrapped in fat. It was extremely hard to dissect that stuff out because it was just wrapped in this really dense, tough, fat tissue. But it's there as a protector. So you take a shot to the shoulder, it's not damaging your nerves. So you'll find that in places that your body wants to protect or add a little bit of cushion or padding just for protection, physical protection, you're going to see adipose tissue. But it's also an energy storage form as well. Down below we have the reticular connective tissue. Guess what kind of fibers are in reticular connective tissue? Reticular fibers. How'd you ever come up with that? That was a stretch, right? That's hard. So yes, it's made up of mostly reticular fibers. This kind of looks like cracks on a sidewalk. So if you see like the appearance of like cracks with little almost like fluffy dots in it, like the fluffy, not really well defined circles, it's probably a reticular connective tissue. This is going to basically be a supportive framework for your lymphatic organs. So it's basically holding the lymph nodes and the lymphatic structures in place. You're going to see it in the spleen, lymph nodes, and the bone marrow. Okay, so we have our loose connective tissues. What are the three types of loose connective tissues? Remember, it's AAR. Areolar, adipose, and reticular. Okay, good. So remember, loose connective tissues, adipose, areolar, reticular. Okay? Or areolar, adipose, reticular, depending on what order you want to go through. These kind of go in threes. So you'll be all right. So guess how many are we going to be in the next set? 6. No, I'm just kidding. 3. Yeah, 3. All right. This one isn't so bad. The hardest of the 3 is going to be the bottom one, and not because it's hard to determine what it is, but it's just hard because it's different from the others. So we have dense connective tissue. We have 2 different types. We have dense regular. Then we have dense irregular. And then we have elastic. Okay, so we have dense regular, we have dense irregular, and then we have elastic. Now remember, you have to put the word dense in this one. Before, we didn't say like loose areolar, loose adipose, loose reticular. We didn't do that. We just called it areolar, adipose, reticular. But here, for these top 2, we call them dense regular or dense irregular. The reason why we call it dense is because compared to the loose connective tissues, how much stuff is in between the fibers? Look at the top picture. How much stuff do you see between those fibers? A lot or a little? Very little, right? Yeah. So these are called dense connective tissues because there's a lot of fibers and nothing else. When you look at adipose connective tissue, there was not a lot of fibers and a lot of cells. Here, you don't see a lot of cells. You don't see a lot of the ground substance. All you see is a lot of the fibers. So if you look at this picture, the top one, dense regular connective tissue, it's waves. That's the giveaway. Waves, wavy, wavy, wavy. All right? You see a couple cells in here, but you get these thick collagen fibers that are all moving in the same direction. So you're going to see these in ligaments and tendons. But here's the key. It resists stress applied in one direction. So when I flex my forearm at the elbow joint, the agonist or the prime mover of that is the biceps brachii, which has a biceps tendon of running between the bicep and the forearm here. And so as I do this, see, I'm only moving it in one direction. It's not like I'm pulling on the tendon this way and this way and this way and this way. It's only pulling in one direction. So they have a great deal of tensile strength in one direction. Lots of collagen fibers. Compare that with this one, the dense irregular connective tissue. What do you see as a difference? Tell me what you see in that picture. Random, a little bit of space, and random. Yeah, it's random. It's randomized. So we still got the collagen fibers, but now they're just randomly arranged. Somewhat randomly. I mean, you can have an influence on the way that the fibers lay down in response to stress, but most of the time with dense irregular connective tissue, this tissue is subject to lots of stresses in multiple directions. And so that's why you have the collagen fibers laid down like they do. What you're seeing here is a cross-section through, but if you were to imagine all these fibers running in all these different directions and just making a slice down the middle of that, that's what you're seeing. It's supposed to withstand stresses applied in all directions. It's durable. So most of the dermis of your skin is made up of dense, irregular connective tissue. The outer layer of the bone is made up of that. Also the cartilage, some of the organ capsules, the valves on your heart are made up of dense, irregular connective tissue. It also has an extensive blood supply compared to dense, regular. So we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the skin, but you know, when you think about the skin and its durability, its toughness, I mean, if you have ever owned anything made of leather, tell me about leather. What's the characteristic and quality of leather? It's tough, durable. Is it easy to rip? No, it's really. I know you apply stuff to the leather and you condition it and stuff like that. But for the most part, leather is tough, durable. Because what part of the animal is the leather? Skin. Yes, it's the animal's skin, which is made up primarily of what kind of tissue? Dense, irregular connective tissue. See? Start making this apply to things that you know in real life and in your own life. It makes it a lot easier. So when you think of leather, tough, durable, think of dense, irregular connective tissue. When we were dissecting cadavers, this is one of my most fond memories. I don't have many fond memories of dissecting cadavers because it's not a very pleasant experience. At least for me, I don't like dissecting cadavers. If you tell me if I never have to see a cadaver again, it'll be too soon. So anyway, I digress. We were working on the cadavers, and one of the first dissections we did was of the back. And so the skin on the back is very thick. And so what we needed to do is you needed to picture me facing you, my back toward you, but picture this as my back. So what you did is you cut the back across here, and then you made an incision down the middle along the spine, and then you started to pull the skin back so you could get to the layers of muscle below. Well, cadavers are greasy because they got fat underneath the skin. So you're like trying to pull on the skin, and your hand keeps slipping. So one thing they taught us to do was to take your scalpel and make a little hole about that long in the back. Then take your finger, put it through, and start pulling. And then you start skinning. You could do it because of the dense, irregular connective tissue. It was like leather. You could pull it back. You could skin a cadaver's back. It was fun. Not much, but there you go. Well, when you dissect a cadaver, you don't realize how long it takes to dissect a cadaver. It takes a long time. It took us about a year to dissect it. And at our most intense point, we were probably dissecting about anywhere between 8 and 12 hours a week. And it still took that long. We started off with a person, and we ended up with the bones. I mean, we basically cleaned them down to the bone. It was, I don't know, great fun. Great fun. All right. The dissecting wasn't so bad. It was the testing that came with it then. Then they'd circle, like put a little string around a loop of something, and you have to tell whether it's a nerve or a vein or an artery. I have no freaking clue. Guess. All right. And the nerves in the head and the neck, it'll keep you up at night. I still have nightmares. I still think I'm in school. Oh, all right. Anyway. Last one, elastic connective tissue. What do you think is the main tissue type here? Elastic. How'd you ever come up with that answer? Yes. Okay. Not a lot of space between. So this one's hard to see. This is not a great picture of elastic tissue, but you see really dark fibers, and they're like really wavy. Okay. So, and the waves might not be that close together, but it's not like this wavy. It's more of a coiled type of, like a tight coily wave. You can see it better here. See how the waves are kind of like just more the ups and downs are more frequent. I'll put it that way. Obviously, it allows for stretching and recoil, so you're going to see it in the walls of your large arteries like the aorta, in your trachea, and your vocal cords, areas that need to stretch. Okay, so what are our loose connective tissues again? Areolar, adipose, reticular, then our dense connective tissues, another 3. Dense, regular, dense, irregular, and elastic. See, we're getting there. We got 6 down. How many are in the next group, do you think? 3. Yeah. Yeah. Cartilage. So you have 3 types of cartilage. So the top one is called hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is really shiny. It's really smooth. It's really tough and durable. It looks, the matrix appears glassy, it says. The fibers are there, but they're not like huge fibers like you see in some of the other tissues. So the fibers are there, but you can't really see them. When you look at a microscopic picture of it, you don't really see the fibers really well defined in hyaline cartilage. You will see it more in fibrocartilage and elastic cartilage, but you're not going to see it so much in the hyaline cartilage. What you're going to see are the chondrocytes, the cartilage cells. They kind of look like eyes. When I was going through this, because of the way it's stained, it always is like a pinkish or a purplish color, the way they stain it. So I'll never forget this. There was a girl that was in class with me when we were learning this histology stuff, and she would call the hyaline cartilage the pretty one. So you call it whatever you want as long as you remember what it is, all right? So the hyaline cartilage, you don't see the fibers on the microscopic picture. You see the chondrocytes. They kind of look like eyes, usually a pinkish or a purple in color. So where you're going to see hyaline cartilage is at the ends of long bones, because it's going to give you a nice, shiny, smooth surface for the bones to articulate against each other with. You also see it on the tip of the nose, in the trachea, in your voice box. I'm sorry, not your voice box, your larynx, which is your the voice box, I guess you call it. Yeah, the costal cartilage, so like the cartilage in your ribs. And so forth. Most of your fetal skeleton is going to be hyaline cartilage as well. So hyaline cartilage, very smooth, glassy almost, and very tough and durable at the same time. Then we have the next type of cartilage called fibrocartilage. We have a lot of collagen fibers here. Okay, so it looks pretty wavy. The collagen fibers kind of give it a wavy appearance. You do see the chondrocytes in here. As you saw before, they still look like eyes, but what you're looking for, the difference between the fibrocartilage and the hyaline cartilage is the way that the fibers look. You can't really see the fibers in hyaline, but you see the fibers in fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is found in places that you're trying to provide cushioning or support or a shock absorber, so to speak. So you're going to see it in the vertebrae of the intervertebral discs, I should say, of the back. You also see it in what they call the pubic symphysis, which goes between the 2 pubic bones in our skeleton. I'll pull up bones here. So, quick skeleton lesson. This is the pelvis. Okay. These 2 bones are called the the ilium. These 2 bones are called the ischium, or the ischia. And then these 2 bones here are called the pubic bones. Between the pubic bones, you have a fibrocartilage pad called the pubic symphysis, runs between the 2. And then here in the intervertebral discs, you also see fibrocartilage. So those are the places where you're going to see fibrocartilage. Resisting shock, shock absorber, and that sort of function. So we have hyaline cartilage, we have fibrocartilage, and then we have the final cartilage, which is elastic cartilage. You'll see fibers here, but they're more stringy. They're not as thick and not as wavy. This is elastic cartilage. You do see chondrocytes as well. and this cartilage is more flexible. So you'll see it in the epiglottis of the larynx. That's the part that flaps down so you don't inhale your food literally. Closes off your airway while you're swallowing, and also the external ear. That's why your ear is flexible. So what are the three types of cartilage? Hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. So what's the loose connective tissue? Three of them. Areolar, adipose, reticular, dense connective tissue. We have dense, regular, dense, irregular, and elastic. And then our cartilage, we have hyaline cartilage, we have fibrocartilage, and elastic. Yeah. Remember our epithelial tissues. We had, what kind of epithelial tissues? We had simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, and then we had stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, stratified columnar, and then we have the two outliers, pseudostratified and transitional. There you go. Getting there. Getting there. Now, you can breathe out because you got through the worst of it. Seriously, that's the worst of it. You know all those. You know those 9. The rest of the connective tissues are like, pff. And they're the two extremes. We got bone and we got blood. So bone. Now, we're going to talk about bone more in Learning Plan 6. There's actually 2 different types of bones. There's compact bone, there's spongy bone. But what you see here on the screen is compact bone. Looks like rings on a tree. You think of that. Can you kind of see that in this picture? Picture a bunch of tree rings shoved together. That's not how it really is in nature, but play along, all right? But you see all the rings. And then you see a dark circle in the middle of those rings. Those are called Haversian systems. It's the central canal of the Haversian system. But you don't have to know that now. All you have to know is when you see this picture that it's bone. Now, bone is a little bit different because we said the characteristics and qualities of the matrix determine the characteristics and qualities of the tissue. Well, bone has collagen fibers in it, but the collagen fibers are covered with hard minerals. That's how bone gets hard. So you have the collagen fibers, but they're covered with minerals. We'll talk more about this in Learning Plan 6. So if I show you this picture, can you appreciate that this is bone? That's pretty easy. Okay, bone. And then the last one is blood. Blood. Now you might be thinking, well, blood, well, where are the fibers in blood? Well, the fibers are not there unless you need to clot your blood. So when we talk about the blood in Learning Plan 10, when you talk about the blood in the cardiovascular system, then we'll talk about blood clotting, and you'll learn that when the blood starts to clot, that's when you see the threads, the fibers show up. But otherwise, when nothing's wrong and everything's A-okay with your blood, you're not going to see fibers because they're water soluble. They're dissolved in the plasma. But you can see cells here, right? Red blood cells, mostly you see some white blood cells. So if you see a bunch of red blood cells, which look like this, they're kind of reddish circles with like white spots in the middle of them. Those are the red blood cells, and then you see a couple other cells there with some darker spots in them. Those are the white blood cells. If you see that with some white space in between, that's blood. So those are the last 2 connective tissues, bone and blood, the extremes. You can handle that, right? So what are connective tissues again? The loose ones, we have what? Areolar, adipose, reticular. Then we have the dense, regular, dense, irregular, and elastic. Then we have the cartilage. We have hyaline cartilage. We have fibrocartilage, and we have elastic cartilage. And then we have the 2 extremes. We have bone and blood. Congratulations, you just did it. There you go. That wasn't so bad, was it? The lymphatic fluid, yes, I can talk to you a little bit about that. Lymphatic tissue, the question was, there's a little bit of mention about lymphatic fluid, and can we talk a little bit about that, just so you kind of know where that all fits in. Okay, so when you look at blood, for example, blood is a mixture. We talked about this yesterday. So blood is a mixture of the cells and the plasma. So you have the liquid portion, and then you have the cells, the red blood cells and the white blood cells, okay? So when your body is trying to keep itself healthy, one of the things that your body does to keep itself healthy is to take some of your body's fluids and pass them through the lymphatic system, through the lymph nodes, and so forth, to make sure that there aren't any pathogens or any potential things that could harm the body. So what your lymphatic vessels do is they take the fluid that's between the cells, which is a filtrate of the blood, really. It's called extracellular fluid. It's the fluid that's not within the cells. It's outside the cells. So it takes some of that extracellular fluid that's in your tissues, and it funnels it into the lymphatic vessels. Once it gets into the lymphatic vessels, then it's called lymph. But really all that is it's very similar to your blood plasma, or it's similar to the fluid the serous fluid that's in between your serous membranes. It's the same kind of fluid that you see in your cerebrospinal fluid. It's the fluid that's not within the cells. It's outside the cells and can be in the tissues sometimes. So it's a little bit different. So the lymphatic fluid is not related to this at all. The only reason why they put the lymphatic and the cardiovascular systems together is because they kind of work hand in hand. They're found in the same place. And like I said, the lymph is kind of like the plasma, but the lymphatic system will dump back into the cardiovascular system eventually. Yeah. Bless you. Does that help you? So that's the connective tissue. Yeah, they said there are two types of fluid connective tissue, blood and lymph. But really, lymph is more of a the way I look at it is more of a filtrate of the body's extracellular fluids, where blood is actually a tissue that's actually created by the body rather than a filtrate. That's how I differentiate the two. So if it were me, I would not consider lymph in the same category as blood. But if you get asked, the book considers them to be the same. Yeah. All right. Okay. Now we're really on the down slide. We're really moving down. All right. So before we get into muscle and nervous tissue to go through those, I want to give you guys another break because we've been going at it for not quite an hour, but long enough to be getting there. Because what I want to do after we're done going through the muscle types, I want to just throw a couple slides up there and go through them with you and make sure that you walk out of here feeling pretty good about it. But I certainly don't want to do that without giving you a break beforehand. So let's go ahead and take a break, again, for about 10 minutes. So we'll come back just a little bit after, quarter after, and then we'll finish off. All right?